Hello, friends. Welcome to Living Out Loud. Today, we want to talk about a topic that affects many people in our society and is often kept quiet. People don't talk about it. But today, I want Debbie to share a little bit of what happened to her in January.
And just to, before I even start, just to preface that this has been the cause of multiple testimonies. The story, as Ethel said, that I'm going to share is really not fun. And as a result of it, I've had probably the most difficult conversations of my life since it occurred. It's not something that can be undone, but it's something that we believe can be redeemed. And I know that if just on God's timing, and this is the time that He wants us to share it, because we can redeem it. In January, we were still in the midst of it. But yeah, the Lord turned it into a beautiful love story. So stay tuned to the end. It is a longer one, but I do need to set the scene. But grab a cup of coffee and come and join us. Okay, so did you really take a coffee?
No.
I didn't think you did. Okay. Let me set the scene a little bit. We had a staff retreat and I wasn't feeling very well, so I didn't want to go. But at the last minute decided that I needed to be there. And then I had a doctor's appointment that the following day, the Monday morning. So Ethel drove me back to Kansas City for my doctor's appointment, and they diagnosed like a UTI and an infection around my stoma from my feeding tube. So they put me on some generic or broad spectrum antibiotics, and said that they would call later in the week once they got sensitivities back. As we were driving back to the retreat, we got a phone call from the Mayo Clinic. And Ethel had said to me, don't be disappointed if they say something you don't want to hear. And I just said to him, disappointed wouldn't be the right word. Devastated would be more likely. And right through all of this, we've had this notion in the background that if everything else fails, we have the Mayo Clinic. So for them to call that afternoon and just to say there's nothing more that they could do, yeah, it was just devastating.
Well, basically, the Mayo Clinic had looked at her records, looked at her charts, and said that this is not a case that they could do anything with. Basically, there's nothing that they could do that would be any different to the doctors that are currently treating Debbie.
Yes.
Basically, no hope.
Right. And short of removing my esophagus, there was nothing more that they could do. But God. Anyway, so went to the retreat, started throwing up almost immediately with the antibiotics. Thursday afternoon, we're waiting for the doctor's office to call, change the antibiotics, and they called and said that there'd been a mix-up, the cultures hadn't been sent, so could I come there on the Friday morning and submit more, fresh samples. When we woke up on Friday morning, I said to Ethel, I feel worse than I did on Monday. I feel too sick to go to the doctor. And of course, he goes, well, that's exactly why we're going to go. But anyway, when we got to the doctor's office, I had a high fever. My pulse rate was high. And literally, they just said, the hospital across the street, go. So we went to the emergency room. I had diabetic ketoacidosis and a borderline sepsis, which either one of those could have been fatal. But yeah, so they admitted me for the IV antibiotics, really strong ones, 2 different ones. And while we were there, Ethel and I got really excited. Yes, I was sick. We didn't realize how sick until they kept coming back in as labs came back and taking more. But we thought, because the surgeon who's been treating me all this time didn't have privileges at this hospital. So they had to get another GI team And we were excited because we thought fresh eyes on everything. Maybe this is going to be, part of God's plan for us. So, all that to say, there were a number of issues that occurred. I'm not going to share them here. This is not the platform. However, I knew I was coming home on Tuesday. We knew that. That was 5 days of antibiotics. That was good. The doctors came in the morning and just said, yeah, you can go home. We'll switch to oral antibiotics. But don't be in a rush because they're still thinking about some stuff and they're throwing around some ideas. So I'm excited. Ethel wasn't there yet. Then my nurse walks into the room and she, without saying anything, starts taking off my EKG stickers. And I was like, what are you doing? And she goes, no, I've got a discharge order in for you. And I said, oh. I said, well, I just spoke to them and they said that they were working on some stuff. She said, no, they put in a discharge order. I was like, okay. And then she said, can I help you pack? And I said, no. I said, let me call my husband so that he can come. And she said, no, you can call him from the discharge lounge. And I go, what is the discharge lounge? And apparently it's supposed to streamline discharges and free up rooms for those that need it. And I called Ethel because she came back in the room with six of those plastic belongings bags and just started putting my stuff into them. So I called Ethel and I said, I can come home. He goes, oh, that's great. And I was crying and he goes, what's wrong? And I said, you need to come and get me. And he said, what was going on? And I said, well, they're throwing me out. And the nurse was like, oh, we're not throwing you out, and thought it was funny. And so I think by this point, I had been hanging on by a thread. And everybody had kept saying how strong I am and still keep saying how strong I am. But I'm not. Yeah. I just felt like the last or the remnants of my dignity were cut just through that whole discharge process. And I won't go into any more detail other than to say that. But anyway, we get in the car and I am crying and Ethel doesn't know what to do with me. And he's like, what can I do? And I go, I don't know, because I don't know what I can do to make it feel better. And so he says, I know exactly what will make you feel better. So we pull into a Quick Trip and he says, I'm going to go and get you a strawberry milkshake. And that is my favorite and it would cheer me up. He goes in and he comes out and he's hanging his head and he goes, the milkshake machine is broken. And immediately I said, you see, you can't make it better.
I failed.
You failed. And we can laugh about this now, but it was really hard going through it and I don't want to minimize that. But yeah, so we got home. I didn't even unpack, from the hospital, kept everything in the bag. Ethel went into his study, to work, and I got onto the bed. I turned facing the window, and I didn't move for like 8 hours. I just was staring. Ethel didn't know what to do with me. It was dark. He called through. He says, "Are you sleeping?" I go, "No." He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "Nothing." And he came in and switched on some lights, and so, we weren't quite sure, or I didn't know where to go from here. Okay, so during the course of that afternoon, some of you may know that I was diagnosed with dementia, vascular dementia, 2 years ago. And so I do struggle. and I don't drive anymore. So Ethel had put a tracker onto my phone, and that afternoon while I was laying there, I picked up my phone and I deleted the app, disabled so that he wouldn't be able to find me. I took a handful of what was left of my muscle relaxants and I put them in my pocket. And I was going to commit suicide. So we go to bed. I've got the tablets in my pocket. About 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, I roll over and I kiss Ethel. I wanted to kiss him goodbye. So I rolled over and I did. I kissed him. And then it was actually very comical now. As our lips touched, there was this huge spark of static electricity, and his eyes open like this, and he just reflexly hits out. And then he lays back and goes, "Oh, what was that?" He said, "Did you just kiss me?" And I said, "I did." And he said, "Did I just hit you?" And I said, "You did." And he rolled towards me and he put his arms around me and he fell back asleep. Because of that, I was not able to get out of bed. My goal had been to take the muscle relaxant since an overdose. It was also that very cold spell where we had it -22. And I knew, okay, this is going to be effective. If the overdose doesn't work, at least the cold will kill me. And that's how desperate I was. But anyway, so the Thursday morning we wake up and I've got to go to the infusion clinic. So Ethel, took me there. He was with me essentially the whole time. So I couldn't take the tablets out of my pocket. We get to the infusion clinic and I walk in the door and the nurses are immediately, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing." And they said, "No, we know you and there's something's wrong, something seriously wrong." And I've never been there where there's no patients except me. But that morning, the Lord had cleared it so that it was just the nurses and I. And I started crying. I told them about my experience at the hospital, how I felt rejected, how I was in this tailspin. And I have gone through depression before. A number of years ago, actually 20, so it doesn't matter. A number of years ago, I went through depression, but it was different. It was as a result of losing my dad, losing my brother, and a rape that I never received counseling for. I knew that once I worked through those grief and other issues that I'd be okay. There was an end in sight, correct. Where I was here, as many of you probably have read, things were just getting worse and worse. No matter how hard we tried, it just seemed one thing on another as far as our health or my health. And that was pretty devastating because today looks like tomorrow, looks like next week, looks like a couple of years. I'll get into bed and go, "Oh, here we go again." Then lay awake all night. And that was the scary time. That was when the enemy just threw those darts. And then I wake up in the morning and I go, "Oh, here we go again." But anyway, I shared with the nurses what was going on. They said that they were mandatory reporters. I said, "I understand that, but I hadn't even told Ethel about my plans the night before." And they said, "Well, what can we do to facilitate that?" and Ethel was sitting in the waiting room outside. And so I said, I probably need to tell Ethel. And so they went and got him. And so he came in. But even before that, the nurses really validated my feelings. They were, well, I don't think I would have been alive if it wasn't for them. And before they went to get Ethel, they asked if they could pray with me. And I said I would love that. And so they all stood around me in a circle. The charge nurse had her hands on my shoulders, and they prayed. And the charge nurse gave me a kiss on the forehead when they were finished. And then they said, okay, when you got Ethel. So Ethel came, we shared it. We had to go to our doctor's office. I think it was just a hospital follow-up. And anyway, so we get home. I had a counselor coming to the house, and I had the infusion clinic had given me the name of a patient advocate at the hospital that I had been at with such bad experience. So I called her, and left a voicemail thinking it was the end of the day. And then just as our counselor arrived, she called back. And anyway, long story short, I had written out and I shared with her everything that went wrong. She said, we'll do an investigation and you'll hear from us in 10 days, whatever it was. Put that aside. But she said, because I shared about how I wasn't safe. I was scared of myself.
You didn't feel safe.
I didn't feel safe. I had been strong up to this point, and it felt like the end. Groundhog Day. Every day is going to be the same thing. But anyway, so before she would hang up, she said, I don't feel like you're safe. Can you please come to the emergency room? And I said, no. I said, I've lost all respect for your facility. And she said, well, then please go to a emergency room. And so our counselor looked up, she had a friend, and we go to St. Luke's. We walk in, their waiting room is packed. And I've got my knitting. And so Ethel's like, we're not going to get out of here till morning. And I was like, oh, that's okay. I got my knitting. So he goes up to register me, and I haven't even got my knitting out. In fact, I don't even think I'd sat my back down yet. But they called my name. And so I looked at him, and I said, what did you tell them? And he said, I told them that you want to kill yourself. So they just hit a vital signs. They take me back to the room. There's no clock. Security comes in. They call security. They give me some paper scrubs, and I have to undress and put on these paper scrubs. And in the process of that, I had to put my hand into my pocket and bring out the handful of the muscle relaxants, which they then put into a bag to be identified by pharmacy. But it was a very dehumanizing and a very humiliating experience. We had an intake interview as far as, because I still had the PICC line and the feeding tube, they couldn't find an inpatient psychiatric facility that would accept me. So after 29 hours in the ER.
On a regular gurney, not even a hospital bed.
Yes. I was transferred up to med-surg, and they decided that they would get a psychiatrist that, just to come and see me in the hospital and prescribe meds and things. The whole of Friday night, I stayed awake. Security would walk by every hour to check on me. I had a minder or a sitter sitting in the corner of the room. I couldn't watch TV because they wouldn't allow. Couldn't even have the call light because it has a cord, and they were scared I'd try and commit suicide with it. And then I just kept saying, no hope. That's just over and over in my mind. What have I done? What have I unleashed? I can't go back. What have I unleashed, and where do I go from here? Because I just kept getting no hope, no hope. Today's the same thing, Groundhog Day. And I knew that wasn't going to be getting better. And so I called Ethel, I think the Friday morning. And then I had said that I had no hope, shared with him that I had no hope. And about 30 seconds later, my nurse for the day walked in.
So they had a shift change at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
The new nurse.
Mm-hmm. And so she walks in and she goes, "Hi, my name is Hope, and I'm taking care of you today." It was a kiss from heaven. And she didn't look like any Hope I knew. She had tattoos and piercings, and there's nothing wrong with that. It was just, it was like the Lord just showing me, there is hope. There is, and you know what? It's not going to look like anything you've ever seen before. It's not the kind of hope that you've had before. This is different. And so this was the beginning, I think, of us getting to face it and work through it together. And so, did you?
Yeah, and then the next person that walked in the room said, "My name is Grace."
That's right.
And Grace is our daughter Christy's middle name, but it also just a confirmation that the grace of the Lord was on you and that you were in the right place. It was very, very traumatic. And, it's something that now gives a much greater appreciation for people going through that situation and how potentially we can help people going through that.
Mm-hmm. And the light, exposing it, if we talk about it more, it's exposed more and it loses its darkness.
And, we absolutely believe that our enemy wants to steal, kill, and destroy. But Jesus came to bring life. And Jesus not only brought life, but saved Debbie, saved our family, the trauma, but then showed his grace and his hope through that. So we're going to end here because it's been a long story, but there's more to come. And so the next episode will be the hospital stay and how God performed a miracle after miracle in that stay in the hospital.